everybody. This is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency, here with an up-to-date climate outlook for all of our friends in New York State. We have a lot of AR community members in New York. We need details for Utica, Buffalo, Rochester, the Finger Lakes, a subtle gloss for various mountain dwellers who don't want anyone pointing directly at them, and of course, folks in New York City and Long Island. All of you supporters in New York, I'm so grateful to you, and I hope this video gets you news you can use. The strength we saw in inland New York State in the NCA5, you're going to see there's still reason for hope. And if you're in coastal New York, there's serious info in this video you should consider as you think about the future. We're also going to share some really strong resources from the state of New York. Your state clearly wants you to get serious about getting ready. Let me get you a little background for this update. When I founded American Resiliency in 2021 and started making these climate outlooks, I called them 2050 climate forecasts. But it seemed reasonable to think we'd hit 2C at mid-century. That was the consensus science. There were a lot of signs we were pretty much on track. But that was then. 2023, as you know, having also lived it, was a very serious year in climate. We hit 2C for a couple of days towards the end of 23. We've been at or above 2C a couple of days so far in 24. 2023 was the first full year we've spent over 1.5C, violating the boundaries of the Paris Accords. So that's got to change our thinking, right? This outlook, it's a 2C outlook, and as far as timeline goes, it seems we're going to find that out. We're going to get there when we get there on this weird road trip. So let's check out the challenge level for New York State at 2C. Just so you know where to find my source material, this forecast is based on the National Climate Assessment. This was just updated. We got the new edition late in 23. We're not going to get a new one until like 2028. So this is the info we've got. There's some significant changes. We're updating the projections for every state. If you want to follow along with me, go here. Go to chapters, go to all figures. You're going to be able to download all the figures and keep them offline. I'm going to tell you the number of the figure when I look at the information with you in the video here. We use the 5th National Climate Assessment because it represents the highest consensus climate science available. Your tax dollars paid for the development and the review of this document, and you deserve access to the information. As a matter of congressional mandate related to the National Climate Assessment, there's no direct federal funding for communication to the public about this important information. That made me so mad I founded American Resiliency, the only nonprofit focused on communicating this important information to the public. We run on your donations, and thanks to your generosity, we're going to be able to keep bringing you this information. Looking at our first figure here, we're looking at 1.14, national overview for changes at 2C. You see that New York is mostly in that higher change band we see up in the north, with New York City falling into the moderate change band. And you will see this overview information does not give us the info we need to understand what is going to happen on the ground in New York. It does let us know that depending on where you are in the state, you're expecting a total heat up of 4 to 5 degrees F. Let's see where that's going to fall seasonally. Let's go look at figure 2.11. All right, here we are. This is a big figure 2.11, and at a glance, we see a very diverse outlook emerging across the state. Let's zoom in on days over 95. So here's your hot days, your additional days over 95 expected, and I like what I see. Where you got white on the map, that means 0 additional days over 95. This lighter color means 0 to 5. And down here in the Hudson River Valley, you do see a few more. You see 5 to 10 additional days over 95, leading towards the city where we do also see that darker color. Don't get too excited about that good news, though, because you can see we're over here in another figure. This is additional warm nights over 70, where it's not really getting cool enough for optimal plant growth, for optimal human cool down at night to recover from a warm day. You can see that over by the lake, we've got an increasing number of warm nights expected, with perhaps a couple extra weeks over 70 at night over by the Finger Lakes. We can see as we move down the Hudson River Valley, we've got increasing warm nights with more than a month of additional warm nights expected down in this urban core. In terms of heat, that makes me concerned about New York City. That's going to be a big increase in energy demand for everybody who wants to keep their air conditioning on overnight. People need to be able to cool down at night to recover from daily heat stress. That mild nighttime heating trend creeping into the edges of the Mohawk Valley, creeping up along the Finger Lakes and around Buffalo and Rochester. You're talking about at most a couple of weeks. I wouldn't worry about that having a super huge agricultural impact, but it is worth considering as you think about home design and garden design choices. Let's get back into figure 2.11. Now we're talking about cold loss. As these colors get darker, we're talking about the days that we're losing that were below freezing. Loss of days under 32. We can see that in the mountains, in the high points of the mountains, we're seeing less cold loss. That's good. It's like gut feels like that would be normal, right? That as you go farther up the mountain, you get less cold loss. Not always the case. Check it out in the Cascades. They're losing more at the top. So this is some good relative normalcy for New York's mountains. Some good news there. And we see some hot spots for cold loss here along the lake, particularly in Buffalo. This red color, you're losing more than a month of cold. Same thing down in the city and at the tip of the island there. So that was duration of the winter. You're looking at a shorter duration cold season. If you were in red, like in Buffalo or in New York City, you're talking about 5, 6 weeks of cold loss. For much of the state, it's still pretty serious. You're talking about a month of cold loss on average in New York. But I think that we need to talk about cold intensity as well as cold duration. Let's look over to figure 11.3. Here you can see 11.3 is another really large figure. It's got present day climate normals. Mid-century projection here is equivalent to 2C. Late century projection here is equivalent to 3C. I feel like it's important for you to know that 3C information is readily available. For this outlook, we're going to be focused on that first step, going from present day to 2C. In just a second, I'm going to pull up a snip where we can zoom in on present day in 2C for New York. All right, New York, this is pretty wild here in the side by side. Okay, upstate in the Adirondacks, there's cold loss, but you're staying cold. You're staying at or below 6 feet, which is a true normal winter low below 0 degrees, and that's 0 F. So we're talking actual cold. If you got a cold there, the cold is preserved in the Mohawk Valley beneath the mountains. Looks like Utica's right on the margin. You're moving towards 7A in the Finger Lakes, and that's a big difference in what you can overwinter, going from 6A to 7A for you folks there in the Finger Lakes. Then over in the Alleghenies, you can see we're holding that true winter, that zone 6 or below winter in the high points, but there's a lot of change there. If you were to go take a look at Western North Carolina today, that's an excellent climate analog for what you're going to see in the Alleghenies at a 2C world. If you're interested in helping to scaffold this changing landscape, this is a situation where we've got a great idea of what needs to be in the Alleghenies if we want to help preserve mountain biodiversity. Now, we talked about cold winter, sort of with a focus on who's keeping a cold winter. Let's ask another question about this figure here. Who's losing a cold winter? And Buffalo, this is wild. We see that you are at 7B, New York City, right in the city. You're going to 8B. It's crazy. That's a current South Carolina winter, people, coming to New York City. I got to take you back to 11.3 to show you something. All right, we're back at 11.3. Look at this orange color here. That's the top part, northern part of the South Carolina coast winter today. Look at that. Look at that lighter orange color way up around Chesapeake Bay, completely up into the bottom of New Jersey. And then we see it emerge again right there around New York. That is South Carolina coming to you in the winter at 2C in New York City. People, this is some pretty serious landscape change in New York State. Looking at some 3-step shifts some places. Some places are getting a 15-degree lift in their winter lows. That's big. That'll cause not just serious landscape change, it'll cause some serious landscape differentiation, growing very different plants in different parts of the state. Let's see what's going to pop up when we water that changing ground. Let's get a look at changes to precipitation. In figure 210 here, we've got an overview where you can see that depending on where you are in the state, at 2C, you're expecting either 5 or 10% more precipitation, which is good news. You want some more water to help plants survive that increased heat in the summers. If you look down in the corner, you'll see that at 3C, much of the state is expected to be fairly stable in that precipitation outlook, with precipitation increasing most notably near the coast and also in the mountains. Let's get another model, get some more details. Over here in figure 4.3, projected changes in annual precipitation by mid-century, I feel like we get some important information where you can see this darker color 2 to 3 instead of 1 to 2 inches. We see falling in the mountains in upstate, along the Hudson Valley, and a little bit more precipitation over in Buffalo, because I know you guys don't get enough precipitation already. But I feel like this is another good note to take out of 4.3. If we go over to the driest models in these ensemble projections, we still see some reliable increase of precipitation for New York State. That's good news. You're not facing the potential for this crazy drought trend that we do see across much of inland US. So more rain, that could be good, but let's find out if that water is going to come in the form of extreme storms. Let's look over at figure 212 here. There's a lot going on here, right? Really, what I look at when I look at this is repeating patterns. And I want to tell you, repeating patterns are looking good for Albany. Albany, you have a particularly low chance of getting hammered by really extreme storms. That's an unusual light signal that's coming up consistently on the map. Nice to see. Buffalo, it looks across all three of these models like you're going to get whacked right on the nose there. You're going to get whacked from the southwest consistently with very high density storms of precipitation. That might be not news to you, but it's still good to be alert. Honestly, folks, let me tell you, when I see a state with mountains and I don't see a lot of conserved strong storm signals, that makes me really happy. Overall, New York State is looking at about 10% more water in your storms. The risk of extreme storms is fairly distributed. This is not the worst I've seen. Inland New York, overall so far, I think you look very exciting. I think you're getting enough water to offset the heat. I think we need to look at the fire map later, but that you do have enough conservation in your mountains, I don't think we're going to freak out too much. I'm putting your fire risk at like yellow alert at worst. I think in many ways your state is changing. It's going to create an incredibly varied inland outlook. Kind of like France today. You could grow such an astonishing variety of plants in these different microclimates. There's going to be tremendous movement of plant life and animal life up through New York State. That land bridge between Hamilton and Buffalo, that's a precious natural feature. And of course, many living things heading north are going to be funneled through New York State from both of those directions. This diverse landscape is going to be populated by many living things. Many living things are going to be on the move. If you're a person connected to the land in inland New York State, get your eyes open for invasive species that are going to choke out opportunities for biodiversity. Kill kudzu fast, kill buckthorn fast. You keep some space open, we're going to get an incoming wave of life moving north from as far away as Georgia that's going to find a new home in New York State. It's going to be wild. If you watch the land, I promise you, you're going to see things you've never seen before. You probably are. At my place, I'm seeing living things come up from hundreds of miles away to the southwest. I'm on the lookout for my first armadillo. They're on the way. They're living in Missouri already. This might amuse you. Sometimes on the internet, you find pockets of the beautiful old internet where like the dorkiness just radiates out in a beautiful way. And this armadillo expansion webpage is a great example of that. Down here, you can see that as of 95, we had armadillos all the way about halfway up Missouri. I think that they could make it to Iowa as the plant hardiness zone changes. But look, New York City, you're already on the map for potential armadillo range expansion. All right, armadillo break over. If you're inland, just sit back and be glad you're not dealing directly with this next part. We're going to do sea level rise. But before I lose you all, I got an important message for everyone in New York State related to sea level rise. No matter how far from the sea you are, the cost to the state of all the sea level rise stuff is going to be really serious. Financially, I don't know how the state's going to handle it. It's hard to imagine this not impacting other parts of the budget. In all states that are highly impacted by sea level rise, I do advise thinking through some things before you decide to stick around. If you're anywhere near the coast, look up information on your local water table. What's going on with your water and your sewer utilities? Look into it. Find out if your sewage outputs would be overtopped. Learn about where your drinking water comes from. If your water table's already pretty high, if your utilities are likely to be impacted, think about how much you trust your local government and utility companies to take care of those issues for you. If your trust levels are good, that's great. If your trust is low, get out while the getting's good because there's not going to be as much money to fix things as there are going to be things that need fixing. If you can get any of your local water people to sit down with you informally, I find those kind of folks are often very willing to give you the straight talk over a beer. From such conversations with water utility people in and around New York City, I can tell you they're very seriously concerned about these issues and they do not have the funding that they say they need to address these problems. All right, now that I've created a bit of an ominous atmosphere around these issues, let's look at how bad they are. New York City, don't worry, we're going to look at you first. In figure 9.2, you can see you were projected to hit about 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050, but I think we do also need to model 10 feet in case of AMOC collapse. Even in 2022, very few mainstream scientists would have raised that as an alarm, but we have a number of alarm bells ringing pretty loud that we could see AMOC collapse, a major change in ocean currents in the next 5 to 10 years. That would accelerate melting in Antarctica, which we are observing happening now, and lead to much more substantial sea level rise than 2 feet in the next 30 years. We could be talking about 10, 13 feet of rise in that time. All right, here we are in the NOAA sea level rise viewers, centered over New York State. We're going to model that range. We're going to model 2 feet and 10 feet. At 2 feet, you see substantial marshiness increasing in like heads up New Jersey. That looks really bad at 2 feet, but not too much direct land loss. I don't like it, but there's not too much direct land loss in the city. At 10 feet, though, I hate it. If AMOC collapses and we see these high sea level rise scenarios, this is going to suck so bad. Look at this crazy crap. Look at the whole south side of Long Island over here. This is terrible at 10 feet. This is all houses. This is all highly developed areas. And look here, even at 2 feet, Freeport, you're still losing a lot of housing even at 2 feet. There's some serious risk that I don't know if people are aware enough about on the south side of Long Island here. This is a situation you could solve with a seawall, or you could get out. And if you want a seawall, you got to get it going now. But I hear the seawall project is not going so good. So you got to decide, do you trust the state to get it built, or are you going to make the change for yourself? Because it's worth noting, this sea level rise stuff, it's not just water coming over the lip of the pier. The water comes up from below. There are already pumping stations all through New York City, keeping the rising groundwater out of sub-basements and basements. They're running 24 hours a day underneath subway stations. The water's already coming up from below, and you know how it is fixing urban infrastructure. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. I feel very confident that there is a lot of tape involved in the current pump setup, like structural duct tape, structural grime. I think it's important to consider. How do you feel about the level of below ground water control today? Do you feel good enough about it to stick around as it gets worse? Because we've already seen that flooding is a problem and it's going to get worse and it's going to feel like it's getting worse fast. That's because we're already hit that threshold where it's a problem and we've been managing these problems for some time. All right, to the viewer, let's get a peek north of the city. At 2 feet, you don't look too bad. I think that we have our primary victim is showing up around Larchmont, where you do see a lot of damage at 10 feet. Here, let's take a minute. Let's look upriver too. If you go up the Hudson, you can see there will be sea level rise impacts well inland. Let's look here at Kingston, New York. My husband, he led high holiday services there one year. He speaks really highly of Kingston. You can see that if we hit the tipping point, if we're looking at AMOC collapse and face 10 feet of sea level rise, you do have some impacts. You do have some land loss here inland, although if you only get expected sea level rise, only 2 feet, it's not such serious problems. I feel like it is worth the heads up though, and for Albany, it's really worth the heads up. And you might not think about it because you're so far inland. But at 2 feet, we start to see some real change. And at 10 feet, you actually have substantial land loss really impacting these industrial sites south of town. Here's a picture zoomed out a little bit so that you can get a picture of that waterway expansion, both north and south of Albany. I feel like this is really worth getting a heads up. In the event of AMOC collapse, all those industrial areas that would be inundated, you got to get them cleaned up first, or you have the potential for a major pollution disaster. If you did do a planned withdrawal, which AMOC collapse won't be like the movies, you'll have some time, you'll have 10 years to adjust. If you got it cleaned up in that time, you'd have an opportunity to use a broader waterway, which is a thing people like, and that could potentially add to some sustainability potential for your region. If AMOC doesn't collapse, if we just get expected sea level rise, Albany doesn't have so much to worry about. But just in case, I did want to give you the heads up. All right, back to you, New York. We're going to look more. We're going to look again. I think we really need to look at this in the context of damage to New Jersey as well. If we're looking at 2 feet, we're looking at serious challenges. We're looking at serious loss of homes and property in this region, and around many of the boroughs. Many of New York's boroughs are problematic. At 10 feet, everyone's getting slammed with probably the least damage to the Bronx. And you can see this damage in New Jersey is just terrible. And this is all highly developed areas that are part of your urban core. There's going to be impacts felt throughout the region from all of this damage. If you're living right here, You're not going to feel safe. Look at this. The water's coming into Manhattan. It's coming right into Central Park. There's no place that's going to feel unchanged in New York City by sea level rise if we hit this tipping point and AMOC goes down. I'm telling you, New York, you got to place your bets. If you think we're flirting with tipping points, do you want to be here? If AMOC goes down, do you want to be here? I don't. I'm hiding from the ocean very far inland, but there's a lot of differences between Iowans and New Yorkers, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just want to show you what the stakes are. You got to place your own bets. In New York City, I got to tell it to you straight. You ever been to New Orleans? This is weird. I don't think we were expecting this, but you're going to turn into New Orleans, particularly in the case of AMOC collapse. You will become a new, spooky, moderately decaying city with weird smells, a lot of mold, and probably the best food in the world. It's going to be hot in New York City. I'm serious. I'm showing you picking up South Carolina flavor at 2C, right? But you're going full Louisiana by 3C. This is like an official full Louisiana alert. If you want to embrace that vibe, probably a very cool person. Dare I say, cooler than me. That is a key difference between New York City and Iowa. We have heard that before. I myself would say that this all looks too scary. I would get out while the getting's good. That's just me. I am admittedly not cool. Okay, that was spooky. Let's see what's going to be on fire. We're looking at 7.4. You're not modeled. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I think because I've been right before. You're picking up so much from Western North Carolina today in your mountains that I bet you're also picking up their fire danger, which is nothing to freak out about, just to be aware about, especially in the Alleghenies, but also in the Adirondacks. I would expect conditions to be ripe for a big fire about every 10 to 15 years as we move towards 2 and 3C, and that you should become fire aware. We've learned a lot about how to manage that level of fire risk. I believe that you can do it. Okay, folks, that was wild. You have a changed landscape in New York. It's got as intense a variation as we find anywhere in the country. It's bananas. Inland, you're seriously turning into the new France, a bouquet of beautiful microclimates that are going to be populated by an incredible wave of life. If you can keep your landscape from getting filled up with garbage plants like kudzu and buckthorn, you're in a position to be guardians of biodiversity. Incredible. It's an incredible position for a person who wants to really get weird with the landscape and see what they can pull together in a high change scenario. In inland New York, it's not going to be too hot or too cold. You're going to have water. Your flooding risk is limited compared to Maine and Vermont, where we are seeing flooding emerge as a seriously high level risk in these NCA5 projections. But that's inland New York. We've got the city on Long Island to deal with too. And if AMOC does not collapse, we're going to have a continued slow erosion of below ground infrastructure as well as water and sewer services there. It's going to be like South Carolina, but not just in the nice way, also in the bad way. And if AMOC goes down, you got a full Louisiana situation, like boat people and all. I personally think the boat people will be the best part, and that is going to be very spooky. The state of New York, though, it has some important resources you should look into if you want to learn more. This one's been in the news lately. So this is the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment. This is the figure that you might have seen if you follow a lot of climate news. This guy got some play. And there's a lot of really good information in this assessment. That climate impact report is good. It's straight up, it doesn't sugarcoat things. It gives more details on this incredible range of likely outcomes in the state, depending on location. I also want to share this older resource. So I have a strong preference for resources that I can download and access easily offline. The projections, particularly for inland New York, they haven't changed that much from what we knew in June of 2015. And this document, which has an adorable acronym, was written by the Department of Health, which means that it's focused on non-scientists. It's really easy to understand. And I don't know, I just found it to be a particularly wholesome resource. We have you grouped up into regions with different response strategies per region. And I think that the regions really make sense and that their response strategies are very clear. To me, this is a precious, high quality, pre AI resource. It was clearly written by some clean hearted dorks with the best of intentions. Maybe you'll like it too. I think it's got a great vibe. New York State, I think this is the wildest state level outlook in the nation. I'm wishing you all the best, and I know a lot of you. If you're interested in a New York State meetup, I got a coordinator for you. Drop us your contact info at the link in the video description. New York State, you got so much potential. Let's get ready, people. And if you want, let's get ready together. Folks, thanks for watching and thanks for joining us. AR has recently passed a milestone. We've reached more than 100,000 people in America with detailed local climate information, and it's thanks to the incredible support of the AR community. There are so many folks committing their financial resources, their energy, their time to helping this information get out there. I'm so grateful to all of you, and I'm so glad that we're doing this together. Thanks for being there with me. I'm going to keep an eye on the news. I'm going to keep an eye on high consensus science. I'm going to try and get you what you need as we go through this together.